I would like to welcome everybody to the session. I'm Ron Saunders. I'm a member of the DWC Steering Committee. Welcome to the panel entitled End the Wait, Addressing the Shortfall in Disability Supports and Services in Canada. The organizer for this session is Dr. William Cowie, Executive Director of the Every Canadian Counts Coalition. Our moderator for the session is Jonathan Marchand, co-founder and chairperson of Co-op Assist, Quebec Cooperative for Independent Living. Jonathan, I'll turn it over to you then to moderate the session.
Yes, thank you, Ron. So, well, my name is Jonathan. I'm an activist and an advocate for people with disabilities. I'm also a spokesperson for Every Canadian Count Coalition. You will learn a little more about me later. Today, we got 5 presentations for you. Our first presenter will be Michelle McDonald, who is the Executive Director of Brain Injury Canada, with over 2 decades of experience in working in the nonprofit sector. Michelle has spent the last 11 years leading organization in their mission of ensuring those living with the effects of acquired brain injury are valued, supported, and engaged in their communities. It's over to you, Michelle. You can go ahead.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Let me just make sure that I get my slides up. So I'm so excited to be here today, and I'm here to put a spotlight on brain injury. So thank you for the intro, Jonathan. I'll just give you a brief overview of Brain Injury Canada. We're the national charitable organization. Our mission is to advance awareness, education, and opportunities and support we advocate at the national level. We establish meaningful connections and collaborations with stakeholders of all sorts, and we educate and empower people living with acquired brain injury, their families, as well as healthcare workers, researchers, and the medical community and the general public. So our vision is a better quality of life for all people affected by acquired brain injury. Of course, it's not going to move forward. Uh-oh. Okay, hold on. Sorry, something just happened. Are you still, okay. Oh, there we go. Okay, so brief overview of acquired brain injury. So an acquired brain injury refers to any damage to the brain that occurs after birth and is not related to a congenital or degenerative disease. So there are 2 types of brain injury: non-traumatic. These are caused by something that happens inside the body or when a substance is introduced that causes damages brain tissue. So an aneurysm, brain tumor, stroke, opioid overdose, to name a few. Then there's also traumatic brain injuries that are caused by something that comes from outside the body. So this is assaults, falls, gunshot wounds, intimate partner violence, motor vehicle accidents, and sports injuries. And in relative to the age, there's different higher causes for different age groups, such as in adults, it's motor vehicle accidents, and in seniors, more falls and strokes. So by the numbers, the stats are pretty staggering. A lot of people don't know how prevalent brain injury is. So there's 165,000 brain injuries in Canada per year. This is just traumatic brain injury. So that's 1 person every 3 minutes. And then when you add in injury due to stroke or other non-traumatic causes, that's 4% of the population lives with brain injury. So that's 1.5 million Canadians. And then because it is so impactful and it impacts the whole family, approximately 14% of the Canadian population is impacted by acquired brain injury. So the impacts of brain injury are broad, and no 2 brain injuries are the same. So they can be cognitive, such as more time needed to process information, difficulty completing tasks, or difficulty with initiating. There's physical, like headaches, sensitivities to light and sound, mobility, chronic pain, fatigue, dizziness, and then emotional, so changes in personality, irritability, sadness, anger, social inappropriateness, grief, and then behavioral impulse control, risky behavior, obsessiveness, social and sexual inappropriateness. So just to name a few. So what's really happening to those living with brain injury? And the iceberg is a really good representation of what we can see versus what we can't see. So mental health, an individual has a significantly greater chance of developing a mental illness after sustaining a brain injury. So 50% of people with traumatic brain injury are affected by depression within the first year. And then a Canadian cohort study found adults with concussion committed suicide 3 times the population norm. Housing, the wait time for brain injury specific housing is 10 to 20 years, depending on your location. Many people do have to live away from their community due to limited housing availability. Long-term care homes often become the default for housing, no matter what age. So we've got 25-year-olds sharing a room with an 80-year-old dementia patient. But many people with brain injury are also refused long-term care due to the behavioral impacts I talked about earlier. So as a result of this, many people with brain injury are living in hospitals with lengths of times averaging 3 to 12 years. Employment. So due to the cognitive, physical, emotional, and behavioral impacts, employment is a challenge regardless of the severity of injury. A systematic review found that approximately only 40% of persons with brain injury return to work after 1 or 2 years. And unemployment and underemployment following brain injury can lead to poor psychosocial outcomes, decreased community integration, and economic dependence. And homelessness, it can be bidirectional. So acquired brain injury can lead to homelessness, and homelessness may increase the risk of acquiring a brain injury. 50% of people experiencing homelessness have a brain injury. And a recent meta-analysis found that 53% of homeless experience a TBI, and 25% of those have a TBI that is moderate to severe. And then incarceration, men and women who sustained a TBI were 2.5 times more likely to be incarcerated. And the majority, 55% of women reported their TBI prior to the first crime, and 41% of men reported their TBI prior to their first crime. So what have we gotten wrong? A lot. We think we know the extent of the issue of the problem, but we don't. We need improved data collection on brain injury incidence rates and treatment, rehabilitation, and recovery. We need to collect data on the impact of brain injury on families and their role as informal caregivers. We need to acknowledge that brain injury is often the root cause of many issues such as unemployment, homelessness, and addictions, and work with stakeholders to find solutions. And all policy and program development should include the full and direct participation of those with lived experience. One size fits all approach to treatment, rehabilitation, and recovery. We need an individualized approach that is person-oriented and driven rather than system-driven. We need coordinated and equitable access to individualized delivery of health and social care across the lifespan. We need to reduce wait times so people are not languishing as they wait for treatment, which can lead to some of those other issues. And empower individuals and families to identify their health needs, participate in their planning and delivery of services, and play an active role in maintaining their own health and well-being. So we treat the injury, but not the whole person. Brain injury is not a mental health issue. Mental health can be a brain injury issue. There are many intersecting challenges in brain injuries, such as mental health, addictions, housing, homelessness, intimate partner violence, discrimination, and we need to work to develop solutions in collaboration with the appropriate stakeholders. We need to encourage consultation with mental health professionals and therapists to create a support system for people who are experiencing the effects of brain injury, and we need to create the necessary supports and services adapted to those with brain injury. So individuals have to fit into eligibility criteria for services and supports. We need to move away from what am I eligible for towards what do I need. Current public disability support programs keep people living around the poverty line. We need to find programs or have a program that enables people to live well. We need to provide fair and equitable access to treatment and supports no matter where a person lives, if they live in a city or if they live rurally. We need to adapt substance use treatment programs and services to accommodate individuals with brain injury. Very often, multi-step programs are a challenge for those with cognitive impairments and don't set them up for success even before they get started. And we need to deem online internet access a basic need now, especially in our virtual society. The solution to the housing crisis is just to build more houses. People with brain injury often have behavior issues and are ineligible for community housing. So we need to prioritize the development of an appropriate housing strategy for brain injury. And we need to ensure that people have stable long-term homes in their community. If a person has a stable home, it decreases the risk of experiencing some of those other intersectional issues. And long-term care homes are never the solution. They actually remove people from society. And then every disability can be seen. Brain injury, as with many other disabilities, is often invisible and hidden. We need to focus on accessibilities for cognitive impairment or sensory sensitivities. We need to provide more education about invisible and hidden disabilities to reduce assumptions, stigma, and promote understanding in the general public and in policymakers. And we need to adopt a symbol that is more inclusive. The current accessibility symbol is misleading and not fully representative. I do encourage you all to visit Hidden Disability Symbol Movement Canada, www.hdscanada.wordpress.com. This is an initiative to have a more representative symbol for those in invisible and hidden disabilities. If a person can't work, they don't have value. We need to separate the concept of value from employment. Not every person with a brain injury, as I said, returns to full employment. We need to address the issues that may cause a barrier to employment at an individual level. So make sure they have the proper housing supports, mental health supports, addiction supports, transportation accommodations that they need to thrive. And we need to foster education and awareness to employers to reduce assumptions, misinformation, and stigmatization, and promote knowledge on accessibility, accommodation, and benefits of hiring a person with a brain injury. We also need to develop holistic and individualized plans, inclusive of employees, employers, and workplaces, and bridge those duties and abilities and provide support and direction over the long term. If employment is not a goal or reality, as it is for some people, provide the services and supports they need for that person to live well. So I know there was a very whirlwind and lots to take in, but we can't continue down this road. We can't continue to fund disability support services in the current fragmented, costly, and ineffective model. So we need a new funding model, and with it a more integrated design for supports and services. So thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to the discussion later on.
Well, thank you, Michelle. And now we'll turn over to Diana Grotinger, who is directing Neurological Health Charities Canada, a coalition of organizations that represent people with brain disease, disorders, and injuries. You can go ahead, Diana.
Thank you. It's just one small correction. It's Deanna. I know it's a funny name to pronounce, so thanks very much. So I'll just share my screen. Okay, thanks, and thanks very much. It's really a pleasure to be here today for Neurological Health Charities Canada. So I want to set the stage for this discussion, and I want to emphasize the importance of brain health as it relates to disability. So not only is brain health critical to millions of Canadians on a personal level, it also severely impacts the Canadian economy. A 2016 report by the Canadian Institutes for Health Research stated that neurological and mental health disorders cost the Canadian economy $61 billion annually. That's 61 billion. That's more than cancer and cardiovascular disease combined. Another report, Mapping Connections, highlighted that neurological conditions are leading causes of severe disability along the lifespan, and that working age Canadians with neurological conditions are much more likely to be permanently unemployed than Canadians without brain conditions. However, as we go along in this presentation, we really need to look more closely at the reasons for this disheartening statistic. So the last 3 points I mentioned are taken from Mapping Connections, which is a 2014 report of the National Population Health Study of Neurological Conditions. So NHCC came together as a coalition of neurological health charities in 2008 to push for a comprehensive study. I was really happy and pleased to hear Michelle's presentation. Not only does it fit very well with what I'm going to be saying, but Brain Injury Canada is also one of the members of Neurological Health Charities Canada. So you can already say there's lots of interconnections among the panelists that you have in front of you today. So in 2008, we convinced the government to invest $15 million in a 4-year study that helped, and then we helped lead that study in a unique collaboration with federal government agencies and departments. It was the most comprehensive study of neurological conditions ever undertaken in Canada. So, and for the first time, it really did validate the scale and nature of neurological conditions and the impact on people living with the conditions, as well, importantly, on families and caregivers. Our role in 2008, as it is today, is to help represent the voice of people with lived experience and assist them to be present at decision-making tables. And right now, we want to build on this important work and to start closing the knowledge gaps that were identified in mapping connections, especially those related to disability and work. So here are some key findings overall from mapping connections. Neurological diseases are the world's largest cause of disability-adjusted life years, or years of healthy life lost due to death or disability. We also found out that half of all recipients of home care or in long-term care facilities have a brain condition. Depression is twice as common among people with neurological conditions. And importantly for our discussion here today, 1 out of 3 families have had a recent financial crisis, and caregivers are also likely to report distress, twice as often as with other chronic diseases. So brain conditions can compromise the quality of life of individuals, families, and caregivers due to negative impacts on mental and general health, well-being, and financial security. We also found out from the study that various condition-related out-of-pocket costs and a potential inability to work or return to work really impacts both people who have the condition as well as their caregivers, which can result in financial instability and stress. On this slide, I want to focus on this last point among the key findings in the report, which is the impact, and that's on unemployment. Michelle mentioned unemployment as being a key issue in people with brain injury. It's also an issue with people with other neurological conditions, and it is, we found, 12 times higher than Canadians living with a neurological condition than in the general population. But this is where we start to delve into that statistics and say, is it because people have a neurological condition, or is it more likely because of a lack of government and community supports? We really need to continue to tease this issue out more closely. The impact on children and families was also a major focus of mapping connections. Again, I'll focus on the 2 points at the bottom of the slide. The impact on families with neurological condition. 35% reported that they had experienced a financial crisis within the last year. And 14% of caregivers reported that if they had employment, that they were demoted or experienced a cut in pay because of their family obligations. Again, was it because of the neurological condition only, or, as we suspect, no, it's more because of the lack of other supports that they could lean on. So the key messages that I really want to leave with you on, in terms of what we learned from mapping connections, is that brain conditions, even though they can be varied in their symptoms and their treatments, but they impact in similar ways. So we really need to work together to address these issues. We know that brain conditions require more health services, so we really need a coordinated approach to providing those services. Family and friend caregivers are an essential part of that care. And so support to caregivers are crucial as we move forward. And we need to act now. There was a small study, or a smaller study as part of a larger mapping connection study, that was a micro simulation of what will happen in 10 to 15 years if nothing changes. And it's found that more Canadians will develop a brain condition and experience severe disability. So what is needed in terms of, especially in terms of disability and work? Michelle mentioned some of these. Coordination of equitable access and delivery of health and care services, making essential medicines accessible and affordable equitably across the country, including drugs for rare disorders, ensuring caregivers have supportive programs and financial assistance, and their support for palliative care planning and programming whenever it needs to be available. NHCC believes the solutions we have identified will work well for the development of an approach and funding model that will address chronic under-resourcing of disability supports and services and allow for integration, which we believe is key, of information, research, and service provision across all disability and wellness needs. So what we're recommending as part of our contribution to this discussion is that, we're favoring an approach that is a recommendation for the development of a national neurological strategy for Canada. We've identified 6 crucial areas that should be included in a national neurological strategy. And we believe that fulfilling these critical areas will help Canadians with neurological conditions who lead to a disability, but also with people with living with other kinds of disability to have to actually address their needs now and have a better quality of life. Again, as I mentioned before, this includes early diagnosis, comprehensive treatment and care, but that includes that coordinating of equitable access and delivery of health and social care services, supporting caregivers, reducing stigma and discrimination, including public attitudes, and protecting the rights of people with neurological conditions. I'll end here and then turn the presentation over to the next presenter, because I think what we're finding today is that there is so much congruence in all of our presentations, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the other presenters. Thank you.
Thanks, Deanna. Now we'll turn over to Jonathan Lai, Kari Walker, and Maddie Dever. Jonathan is the Executive Director at the Canadian Autism Spectrum Disorder Alliance. Jonathan's work involves building consensus among stakeholders nationally, responding to emerging policy gaps in the autism and disability sector. Kari and Maddie are also with Canadian Autism Spectrum Disorder Alliance. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you, Michelle and Deanna. Some really concrete and actionable points. A quick background about CASDA before I turn it over to Corey and then Maddie. The Canadian Autism Spectrum Disorder Alliance is a nonprofit coalition of over 300 sector leaders, including autistic people, caregivers, clinicians, researchers, and representatives from organizations across the country. We've proactively mobilized as one voice to advocate for a national autism strategy. We lead by convening, creating a community-driven evidence to policy pipeline in the sector. We envision a Canada where autistic people and their families have full and equitable access to the resources they need across the lifespan, where and when they need them. So as you can pick up from our vision and mission, that our advocacy includes a rights-based lens and an evidence-informed, inclusive policy design approach to autism-related policy. And as Michelle mentioned earlier, when we look at the current design of services and supports in Canada, one would come to the conclusion that people are primarily valued for economic productivity. However, that was if we were looking at the current design. We know that these things weren't designed or intentionally put together, but a patchwork of regulations and supports. So for our time here, we want to bring in some personal experiences to illustrate the issues we're speaking about from two of our board members at CASDA. These are two autistic perspectives, one from rural BC and the other from rural Ontario, about employment-related policy challenges and how supports could be structured to allow for maximal participation for disabled peoples. So first off is Corey Walker. He's an autistic self-advocate from Prince George, BC. He's currently employed by the Pacific Autism Family Network. He's also a dynamic speaker who's made his life's mission to educate others about autism. Over to you, Corey.
Thank you, Jonathan. And so I don't actually have a PowerPoint slide, so I won't be sharing a screen, but I do have some notes that I will be following here. So hang on a sec. And I apologize if my presentation doesn't flow as well as it should, as originally Maddie was supposed to be going first, but I got my end time mixed up and I have another commitment, so I apologize. One of the biggest problems, so I've been asked to talk about like disability supports and how they can tie in with like employment supports and the government welfare system. So one of the biggest problems with disability supports in my experience, at least here in British Columbia, is the fact that such supports are typically tied in as part of a government welfare and employment programs. Here in BC, in order to apply for the Persons with Disabilities benefit, you have to first apply for income assistance, which is BC's name for welfare. However, welfare is intended for people who are temporarily down their luck and are unable to access other forms of financial support, such as employment insurance or employer-provided benefits. While some clients do remain on income assistance for many years, the Ministry of Social Development sees income assistance as short-term assistance, and in fact requires you to prove that you spent at least 3 weeks job searching before you apply for assistance. The only exceptions are for medical reasons or people facing imminent eviction from their home. Once you qualify for assistance, you're expected to provide regular proof that you're looking for work or prove that you're temporarily or permanently unable to work. Once you qualify for income assistance, people with permanent disabilities can then apply for Persons with Disability benefits, better known as PWD here in BC. If you qualify for PWD, your assistance rate increases significantly, and you may become eligible for additional medical benefits depending on a client's specific needs. However, PWD applications can take a few months to process, so in the meantime, a disabled person is struggling to make ends meet with a tiny welfare check they receive each month. Also, for proof for PWD, you still remain a client to the same department that manages income assistance clients. I find this to be frustrating and challenging for a number of reasons. One source of frustration is the unfortunate stigma attached to welfare programs and their recipients by some people. When I take a taxi to the disability office, I have to ask for the welfare office, as that's what the taxi drivers know it as. I always worry that the taxi driver is going to think I'm someone who's too lazy to work. Of course, most people receiving welfare are not too lazy to work, but the stigma remains. Another source of frustration is that you have to make it clear to workers that you are a disability client, not an income assistance client, as disability clients receive additional supports and benefits. Perhaps the biggest drawback with disability supports being linked to welfare supports is the fact that disability benefits are income tested, similar to income assistance benefits. Sure, I can earn more in a year than an income assistance client. I don't expect to earn a six-figure salary and still receive a government check. But we have to honestly report our income to the ministry every month as long as our file is open, even if I'm on medical services only for seeing my annual income allowance in a year. I find it so frustrating they treat us disabled clients the same way they treat their non-disabled clients. Of course, all ministry clients deserve to be supported and respected, but my disability is permanent and isn't going away. While I am fortunate enough that I can and do work, many PWD recipients cannot, and yet they're punished for it because the government expects them to work part-time to supplement their disability checks, instead of providing additional financial supports to those who legitimately cannot work. In fact, the name of the statute governing disability benefits in BC is the Employment and Assistance for Persons with Disabilities Act. The word employment is right in the title, kind of says it all. In closing, I would argue this is a systemic issue that can only be fixed by separating government disability support programs from regular welfare and other non-disability support programs. The needs of each client group are distinctly different, and each group would be better served by having their cases managed by separate departments, each with dedicated offices and staff, specifically trained and empowered to support the unique needs of the client group they serve. This is something the BC government has been promising for years, but to date they've failed to deliver on. While I don't know the specifics of other provinces, I know that most of them have the same delivery model for the disabilities, and therefore they face the same challenges. I like what one previous presenter said. Instead of looking at what am I eligible for, look at what are my needs. I think that's what we need to focus on. Thank you.
Thanks, Corey. Next up, we have Maddie Dever. Maddie's a non-binary autistic adult and a parent of 5 children, who 4 are also autistic and living in rural Eastern Ontario. Maddie advocates with both the provincial and federal governments for inclusion and acceptance of autistic individuals and for autistic people to have their own voice in policy decisions. Maddie is a writer, speaker, podcaster, and a former member of the Ontario Autism Program Advisory Panel and the Ontario Autism Program Implementation Working Group. Maddie's also on the board of directors of CASDA and ConnectWell Community Health. Over to you, Maddie.
Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you for the opportunity to share our insights today as autistic advocates and with lived experience. And thank you, Corey, for sharing your own experiences with disability supports. In Canada, we have a patchwork system of supports for people with disabilities. So much money, effort, and research has been aimed at supports for children and their family. And we've gone from supporting only young children before school age to a system that has a wider number of programs and supports for children and teens. However, one of the challenges that autistics and their families occurs as they approach adulthood. In Canada, and specifically in Ontario, all of the supports that families receive for children end on their 18th birthday. And all funding for clinical supports, financial supports, respite, they all end the moment you are 18. The systems for children do not transition into the systems for adults. They are all very different, more complex, and also have very long wait lists. Families can see a significant decrease in their finances if they have been supported by the government. And those autistics who go on to post-secondary education are now dealing with a completely different environment that is less structured than high school. Autistic burnout and other mental health issues may appear or worsen as we try to cope with being out more independently in a world that is more different and foreign to us than we may have been as we were protected from at home. Finding employment is a challenge. And though there are some programs that can assist autistics with finding employment, there are far fewer programs and supports for job coaching and mentoring once we are employed. Because of this, many autistics experience burnout or continual job losses. Employment is the first piece in a domino that can affect every other part of our lives. Without employment, housing becomes precarious and unstable. Without employment, access to proper eating routines becomes difficult. And the lack of routines and clarity and certainty can bring about crippling anxiety and the onset of other mental health conditions. The lack of housing that fits our needs must be addressed, and services that provide such support are needed now. Housing is a real hidden system that can be especially difficult for autistics to navigate. In the case of autism and invisible disability, our needs are often unprotected or unrecognized. A functional advocacy program supporting autistic individuals in communicating their needs is key to tackling this and concurrently supports independent living. And independent living often creates risks of exploitation by landlords due to ignorance, lack of accommodations. In addition to inaccessible residential tenancy laws, barriers to independence seem insurmountable, especially during this pandemic. When housing systems fail, autistics become homeless. Autistics become institutionalized. Autistics experience significant physical and mental health challenges, and family members feel great sadness, guilt, grief, anger. And because of the disabling aspects of autism and the many systemic barriers that exist to gaining and keeping meaningful, gainful employment, a large percentage of us rely on government disability financial supports, which are extremely varied across the country in terms of how much and for how long we are supported. The situation that Corey's experienced in BC is very similar to the experiences we have here in Ontario and that I do on the Ontario Disability Support Program. Most of these programs are not funded in a way to bring us above the poverty level. We are kept down and struggling with a desire to have an improved quality of life, but no idea where to turn to, who to trust to be able to get the supports that we need to thrive. And disabled adults have a right to a better quality of life. But to get there, we need systemic changes in transitions to adulthood, post-secondary educational support, navigational support for housing, employment, and a baseline income support system that can ensure we have money for rent, for food, and activities that will allow us to thrive. And I'm encouraged that we are beginning to see the need to make these and the other supports available sooner than later for the over 6.2 million people with disabilities living in Canada. Thank you.
Thanks. Back over to you, Jonathan.
Now we'll turn over to Bill Cowie, who is chair of the Every Canadian Counts Coalition. He'll be speaking for a few minutes, and he's here to help answer any questions after the presentations. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. I hope all of you can hear me. Wasn't my intention to actually present today. Max Bro, who is a vice president of BDO Consulting and who was very engaged in the drafting of the accessibility legislation, unfortunately had an accident yesterday and is unable to make it today. Max himself has a disability, and the accident occurred as a result of the lift that he uses to get into bed fell on him, unfortunately. So this is just one more incident, you know, of the kinds of challenges that people face, and we just wish Max the best. We're still waiting to hear. As I say, I will try to be respectful of some of the ideas that Max wanted to convey to you. But before, I think I would, on a little more positive note, I wanted to mention to you that BDO Consulting on December 3rd, on the International Day of Persons with Disabilities, have made public the most recent information on entrepreneurship among people with disabilities in Canada, titled Shining an Entrepreneurial Spotlight on the Disability Community. It's an infographic. If you want to know how to get it, if you want to get onto our latest Twitter feed, we provided the links to that bit of information for you. Max wanted to talk about several things. One was intersectionality, and I think we've seen from many of the previous discussions, you know, we've discussed that at length, that the forces and pressures and vectors that come to bear on an individual's life are multitudinous, and so when you go to look at the needs of a person with disabilities, you have to take many things into consideration, and be prepared for the fact that you know it's not the one size fits all, as it was noted earlier. It also suggests that if we're going to come at this, we have to look at it. It's a global in nature problem. It's not, you know, let's not build. It's not microeconomics. It's macroeconomics. It's not micro sociology. It's macro sociology. We've got to take a global perspective on this. Get our statistics down in terms of the numbers that we're dealing with, and the range of conditions we're dealing with, and the range of supports that are needed, and which it also indicates, you know, many of us already know what needs to be done. What needs to be done is not very often the issue for us right now. And what's happened, of course, is the post-COVID reality, is that the COVID has highlighted all of the, you know, it's been an enabler of understanding of the fault lines in our systems right now. And I think it has forced the discussion and advanced the agenda in many ways, albeit if a little bit slowly on occasion. But the bottom line of it all is, with everybody who's been presenting here, is it's the elephant in the room that nobody ever talks about, and that is the lack of resources. You know, the fragmentation of the system, the competition of disability organizations to get their voice heard and to find their place in the sun, and it's all a product of resource scarcity. And until we address that fundamental problem of resource scarcity and mainly finances, we're going to continue to have these discussions basically forever. If anybody knows Every Canadian Counts and knows me, and probably bored by what I've been saying, but you know, we've been promoting the Australian funding model as a way out of this resource shortage dilemma, and Jonathan will be talking a little bit more about that, and I'll be talking about it in some of the presentations tomorrow. So I will end it off there and turn it over to Jonathan. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Bill. So as Bill said, now we'll talk about solutions. First, who am I? Well, my name is Jonathan Marshall. I'm 45 years old. I'm an activist and an advocate for people with disabilities. I'm a senior network engineer. I worked in Australia and Quebec for many years. And I'm also a survivor of institutionalization and euthanasia because of the lack of support to live in the community. I need 24-hour assistance because I use a ventilator to breathe. I'm also a spokesperson for Every Canadian Count Coalition and the co-founder and chair of Co-op Assist, which is a Quebec cooperative for independent living. Now, like the majority of people with severe disability, I had a pretty bad experience. I was warehoused away in institutions because of the lack of support to live in the community. In those places, you got no choice or control over your life. You can't choose where you live, how you live, with whom you live. You can't choose who touches your body to provide you the assistance that you need. You cannot have a normal family life, and you cannot work and invest in your future. You are subjected to violence and abuse every day of your life. You lose your citizenship. You become an object of care and profit. For most, there's no way out. It is a final destination. And sadly, euthanasia and medical assistance in dying is now seen as a solution to this problem. Now, let's say that I was not having it. I thought with every fiber of my being to get out of that place. And with other people with disability, we propose solutions to the Quebec government. We propose the creation of the pilot project so that me and others could quit the institutions, long-term care facilities, and go back live in the community independently using self-directed personal assistance. The government was not receptive to our demands. We lobbied them for many years. They did not want to listen to us. So we thought, and last year I spent 5 days and 5 nights in front of the National Assembly in Quebec. I had a bed, I had all you live, and I stayed there for 5 nights and 5 days. And I negotiated with the government, and we agreed to look at the creation of the pilot project. Now, after a year, I'm happy to be now in my own apartment in Quebec. I hired 10 personal assistants to provide me the assistance I need around the clock. And I'm now resuming working. So I'm now a contributing member of society. Now, if we look at solutions and so that things like that don't happen anymore, because one of my goals is that no one else has to suffer what I had to endure. And there's many programs that exist in many other countries, for example, in Germany, in Denmark, in Australia. We could talk about Sweden as well, that provide support for people with disability. Today, we'll be looking at the National Disability Insurance Scheme that originated in Australia. Now, why did this program was put in place was because their support system in Australia was broken for people with disability. It was a lottery, mostly as to whom got support, much like it is in Canada. So a coalition of the individuals and caregivers and support agencies proposed a national insurance program to cover all those living with chronic severe disabilities. And after years of work, it gained unanimous support among the Australian public and the policymakers. Now, if we look more closely at the outcomes of this scheme in Australia, there was a doubling in funding as a result. Now they got the national program that offers consistent need-based support, including early intervention. It has sustained political support. And as of now, the program is available in the whole country. Close to 500,000 individualized plans are in place. Nearly 70,000 service providers are registered, and an average of $56,000 per person is invested per year. And 94% of recipients rated planning good to very good. And the program contributes to economic growth as it creates hundreds of thousands of jobs. Now, in Canada, we need something similar. We need an insurance program that will cover the cost. So a national publicly funded disability insurance program is needed to cover all Canadians living with long-term disabilities throughout their lives, provide essential support and services for community living, social participation, and work, ensure portability and minimum standard across Canada, and make sure that people with disabilities have choice and control over their lives. It would introduce new federal funding to the disability sector, which is much needed. Now, the public insurance model is very important because it is a lifetime approach to care and support. It replaces specialist disability services. It's in the tradition of Medicare, of our universal healthcare system, because it would enable us to calculate the cost of meeting essential lifetime needs. It would help us estimate premiums, and above all, it is a sustainable model. Who would be eligible for such an insurance program? Well, people with severe disabilities, people who always or sometimes need help with a core activity or task would be eligible for life. Carers will also be recognized and supported in their roles. Opportunities to combine caring and work will be encouraged so that families and carers have choice and control as well. And well, the principle underpinning an insurance program would be that participants have a plan and goal that focus on maximizing independence, social, and economic participation. It would work alongside disability support pensions and other measures such as health, education, housing, and other public services. It would not be means tested. It is not charity. It is an equitable insurance model. It would provide early intervention and sustained support. It would be based on individualized planning and funding. People with disabilities would have choice and control over how funding is managed, and the modes of support would be many. Some people could use self-directed, others could use agencies, for example. Now, the program would enable people with disabilities to live independently. Individualized plans would include things such as personal development, life skills, communication, and personal life management. It would also include home and transport modifications, which will be integrated to all provincial housing programs in a holistic approach. It will also include support for work, how to prepare for work, finding and maintaining a job. It will also include personal assistance, respite, aids, equipment, community and day programs. Now, what are the benefits of an insurance program? Well, then living in the community with the necessary support will become a right, which it is not in Canada right now. Then become full citizens with choice and control over our lives. The People with disabilities and their families would have certainty and clarity about their options. It would provide personalized support over the entire lifespan, and it would include housing, transportation, and work. Families would have more choice about the combination of work and informal care at various life stages, as in other families. It would address the current unmet need for support and the unsustainable reliance on unpaid carers. Now, how can you help? You can visit our website at everycanadiancount.com, and you can call for National Disability Insurance Program. Now we'll have a Q&A, and we'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you. It was a very compelling presentation. We only saw your first slide, but nevertheless, you were very clear in your presentation, and it's very compelling. Thank you. We only have a few minutes now before the close of the session, but we could take one or two questions. There was a question in the chat about the Australian model, in particular, whether people over 65 are eligible for the Australian Disability Insurance Plan, or is it intended for people only of working age? Jonathan, could you answer that question?
Right now, it's not for people over the age of 65, but I believe they're talking about extending it to people who are in that age range.
Yeah, I can answer that as well. Yeah, when the program was first launched, no, the elder care system remained intact, and the insurance program catered to people up to 65. But as they aged out, the move is to retain them in the program. But that's the idea.
Okay, thank you, Bill. So, and Jonathan, I think if it's okay with you, we're going to try to post your slides on the conference website, so people will have an opportunity to look at the slides that I guess describe the Australian model. Let's see if there are any more questions in. I'm not seeing any more questions right now in the chat or Q&A. We have, I mean, we're near the end of the session, but we probably, oh, is there one that's just popped up? Oh, it's a question from one of my colleagues on the steering committee, which is, will you be working with the new Canadian disability benefit? I guess, are you involved in the discussions around the new Canadian disability benefit, and what opportunities perhaps do you see there? Bill, do you want to talk about that?
Well, we're certainly supportive of that effort, but as was said in the earlier panel, the issue of disability supports and services is quite separate from the issue of income supports. Disability services and supports, from our perspective, should be an entitlement, which can be delivered through an insurance model, an entitlement that is not means tested, and that actually strengthens the income measures, because it means that any new income that is provided to people will not then have to be used for people to provide the services and supports they need, thereby neutralizing the income effect, right? So we're very determined to sort of keep those two as separate issues, but we're certainly supportive of any income efforts, absolutely.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Bill. I guess there's sort of two complementary tracks in a sense, but you're making an important point about what, the model that you're proposing is separate from income support.
Yeah, definitely. And it is a good initiative, but it's not going to solve issues such as the one I face, for example. A disability benefit would not help me live independently in the community, because the cost of doing that is it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars for someone who have a severe disability such as myself. So it's a good initiative, but we really need a comprehensive insurance program for people with disabilities to live in the community.
One of the things I think we need to separate what we need in order to live and what we need in order to thrive. And I think that's the difference between, having the supports that are purely income based and having the supports that fit in all of the gaps. All of the barriers are the things that we need the supports to remove those barriers or to accommodate us around us. But we need more income to live than we have right now.
Thank you, Maddie. Okay, we're actually almost at 3:30, so we probably should bring things to a close. I do want to again thank Bill Cowie for organizing the session, Jonathan for moderating it, and all of the speakers for your participation and some very compelling personal stories. Thank you. So I would invite everybody to take a look at the conference hall after we end the session now. You can go into the website and take a look, for example, at pre-recorded presentations. You can take a look at the exhibitor booths. And I hope that we will see all of you at the conference tomorrow. Oh, there's one question that just popped up in the chat. Sorry, just a second. We'll see if we can oh, there's a hand raised, sorry, from Kelly Foote. Okay, is it possible, Sabrina, that you could allow Kelly to join as a panelist so she can offer her question? Oh, the hand is lowered again. All right. Okay, we'll leave it at that then. So thanks again to everybody for participating, and hope to see you all at the conference tomorrow. Bye, everybody.